bad boys. What you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Get arrested, probably get charged, go to trial, possibly get convicted and sentenced to a set term, possibly with parole. It's not exactly the song. It's not a great jingle, but there's something there. I know it wasn't. You're not going to hear it at the Grammys. It's got to fine-tune it. Hi. Hello, true crimers. I don't know what I'm doing anymore with my life. This is another compilation video. It's going to be another long one. It's got 25 videos. This is part 4 of dudes who are bad boys, bad guys who have murdered, or other whatever things. So, yeah, this is the 4th one of these I've done. This is one of my biggest playlists on TikTok. There's a lot of bad guys out there. Yeah. I'm a guy. I'm good. What am I? Enjoy? Don't enjoy it. You can't really enjoy this because it's about sad stuff. You know what I mean. I'm awkward. This is awkward. This is weird. This is... I'm going. There's no one there. Okay. Anyway, viewer... What's my thing again? Something about viewer secretion? Secretion, is it? No. Don't secrete. Viewer discretion. Oh, viewer discretion. Hey, true crimers. This is the case of Christina Marie Williams. Christina was born on May 1st, 1985, and she was actually born in Okinawa, Japan. But at the time of this case, she was living in Seaside, California. Oh, look how pretty it is there. On June 12, 1998, Christina was out taking her dog for a walk. It's believed she walked out of the house around 7:30 p.m. Roughly an hour to an hour and a half later, her dog, Greg, it's a weird name for a dog, returned home dragging his leash, and he was by himself. For the better part of 7 months, they were searching and searching and searching for Christina. Celebrities like Clint Eastwood and Mariah Carey put out announcements trying to help find her. But on January 12th, 1999, approximately 3 miles from Christina's home, a botanist from University of California, Santa Cruz, while doing research, came across the remains of Christina Marie Williams. Her parents were obviously devastated, as was the entire community of Seaside. There was evidence that Christina had been sexually assaulted, and DNA was left on her remains. A man by the name of Charles Holyfield became a person of interest in this, because at the time of the body being found, he was actually in prison for attempted kidnapping, and he had a history of sexually assaulting teenage girls. But at the time of the disappearance, he was not in prison, and he was reportedly in the area. But one of his girlfriends gave him an alibi, so he had become ruled out. That was until the year 2011, when she recanted her alibi. He forced her to give an alibi, or else he would harm her or possibly end her life. Because he had been in the system, they had his DNA on file, so they matched it to the DNA they found on Christina Williams back in 1999. And this was actually done in 2016, when he was arrested for kidnapping and murder and sexual assault. Holy what the is that? Is that Yosemite Jesus? The is on your face? Looks like tiny tornadoes are trying to form and drag your ass away. Jesus. In 2019, he waived his right to a jury trial, basically so he couldn't get the death penalty. He also waived his rights to future appeals, and on March 20th, 2020, the judge, who was the jury in this case, found him to be guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He should also get a second life sentence for the catastrophe on his face. And that is the unfortunate case of Christina Marie Williams. This is the case of Lori Hayes. On August 1st, 1999, Lori Hayes and her 10-month-old baby went shopping at the shoe carnival. Sounds fun, never heard of it. But after this, she would never be seen alive again. And by the by, this is in Springfield, Illinois. You see, sometime later that afternoon, Lori's white Jeep would be found in a parking lot, but she was nowhere to be found. But in the car was her 10-month-old baby, alive. Foul play was immediately suspected because there was blood on the rear bumper of the car and a shell casing. The family, along with authorities, searched and searched and searched for days. They even stretched hundreds of miles outside of Springfield. They say something horrible had to have happened to Lori because she would never abandon her baby in a hot car or just pick up and leave without a trace. Well, police would get lucky as they noticed tire tracks going into a cornfield. They were fresh tire marks, so they followed them. And in the cornfield was the body of 25-year-old Lori Hayes. She was found in a position with her arm above her head, and some of her clothing was physically torn apart. And her cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head, execution style. DNA was left behind by, at the time, an unknown male. Witnesses had seen 36-year-old Dale Lash driving the white Jeep and parking it in the parking lot and abandoning the baby. Now, all of this happened sometime down the road from the actual disappearance. So by the time they had all this witness testimony and all the DNA collected, Dale Lash was actually already in jail. He was facing other sexual assault charges. So they were able to match the DNA left behind in the Lori Hayes case to Dale Lash, and to the sexual assault of another woman who was a realtor who survived. All in all, he was charged with 3 counts of sexual assault from other women, kidnapping, aggravated sexual assault, endangering the health of a child, and of course, murder. And in November of 2002, he was convicted of all charges and sentenced to death. He had also received 60 additional years for the convictions of the sexual assaults from the other women. Now, his death sentence would be reversed to life in prison without parole, because in 2003, Illinois had essentially banished the death penalty. But he will die in prison, and Lori and her family get their justice. Hey, true crimers, this is the case of Michael Devlin. In 2007, Michael here was living in Kirkwood, Missouri. Missouri? I don't know. And he was a manager at Imos Pizzeria. He was also a part-time funeral home worker. Nice. Let's rewind time here just for a moment. On October 6, 2002, 11-year-old Sean Hornbeck went missing. He was just riding a bike to his friend's house in Richwoods, Missouri. But he never made it there and he was reported missing. At the time of his disappearance, witnesses saw a white pickup truck in the area that Sean was. Now, let's fast forward back to 2007. Police happened to notice the exact same white pickup truck that witnesses described in the parking lot of Devlin's apartment complex. The police were there because they had another arrest warrant they were trying to serve. When they entered his apartment, they found 13-year-old Ben Ownby, who had actually disappeared 4 days prior. And sitting on the couch of the apartment complex? Well, now 15-year-old Sean Hornbeck. It goes without saying, but Michael Devlin was then arrested. And both boys were reunited with their families. Hornbeck had been away from his family for 4 years, 3 months, and 6 days. Inside the Oh god, inside the apartment they found this atrocity, and there was just cat hair and feces and shit all over the place. Oh, get it away! Oh god, thank god. It would be later revealed that Michael Devlin here molested Sean Hornbeck for several years, until he grew too old for him. Ugh. I fucking hate the world. I hate the people in the world. This is when he decided to go cruise the town looking for another young boy, and he brought Sean along with him. Oh, great. And that's how and when he kidnapped Ben Ownby. Devlin would be charged with kidnapping, child molestation, and production of child pornography. Ugh. He would actually get charged with 71 felony charges. 17 of them were for forcible sodomy. God, I hate people! He was, of course, convicted, and he got 71 life sentences. Good it is, prick. And while life may never again be normal for these two young individuals, at least they got to go home, where so many children before them in other cases have not. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Rebekah Gould. Viewer discretion is advised. I guess I have to give more warnings now. These are videos about murders. You shouldn't watch them if you can't handle them. I don't know how many warnings I have to give. Anyway, let's go on. In September of 2004, 22-year-old Rebekah Gould was visiting her boyfriend in Melbourne, Arkansas. On that morning, she dropped her boyfriend off at work, and then she took a quick trip to a convenience store. And the convenience store was the last time she was ever seen alive. She was reported missing that day. Police had done a wellness check at her apartment, and when they entered it, they found large amounts of blood kind of throughout the apartment, which then gave them the thought that she had been taken, by force. Her car keys, her wallet, all found in the apartment. So the community banded together along with the authorities and they began a large search. But unfortunately, 1 week later, down a 35-foot embankment off Arkansas State Highway 9, they found the body of Rebekah Gould. It appeared that she had at least 1 or 2 blows to the head, which caused her death. They, of course, initially suspected her boyfriend, but he eventually was cleared. And that's all they had. This case actually went cold pretty quickly, and for 16 years, it went unsolved. There was a Facebook to helping find her killer. One of the people who began messaging the head of the Facebook group was William Alma Miller. He would direct message the lead of the group, and he kept saying, we gotta help find her killer, we gotta help get her justice. He even put the head of the group in contact with a neighbor of Rebekah who said she heard Rebekah screaming that night. Interesting. I don't know how the police made the connection, but he became a person of interest, and so the police interviewed him. And in that interview, he confessed to killing Rebekah Gould. He said that he knocked on her apartment door that night and asked to use her phone, which she allowed him to do. He said then she went back to her bedroom and went to bed, which is very odd, considering to everyone's knowledge, they had no knowledge of each other's existence. But he found a leg to a piano in her living room, and then he bludgeoned her to death with it. He then wrapped her in a blanket, placed her in the bed of his truck, and dumped her like garbage along the side of the highway. The motive? No one knows, apparently. Or the police aren't saying what the motive is yet. So as far as it looks, it's a random stranger who just murdered a random stranger for no reason. His jury trial is set to begin on August 25th, 2021. Rotten hell.
True crimerers. No, I am not Mike, but I am one of these, so just go ahead and take your pick. No wrong answers. And this is a sick f***. And I feel like that's kind of saying a lot coming from me because I am a sick f***. Thing I should not tell people I'm a sick f***. This is self-obsessed psycho waste of space Luka Magnotta, and he's a lot of things. So let's go down the list. Convicted fraudster, a liar, a terrible porn actor, so you can just trust me on that one. A kitten and puppy murderer, a human murderer, chopper-upperer, candle blower, and necrophilerer, which sure seems like the recipe for a sick f*** to me, don't you think? And this is Junlin, the shy, kind-hearted, intelligent, loved cat dad that Magnotta took from us far too soon and in the most disgusting and inhuman way possible. On May 24th, 2012, Magnotta would post this Craigslist ad seeking an actor for a personal film he was making. That evening, Lynn would text his friends at 9 o'clock and at 10:16 arrive at Luka's apartment. Now Magnotta, here wearing a wig, knew exactly what Junlin's fate would be, because around 10 days prior, he started a marketing campaign for the video that he was about to make. Seen here, and the film was titled One Lunatic, One Ice Pick. The 11-minute film begins with Junlin alive and moving, but most likely drugged and tied to a bed. We then see Magnotta repeatedly stabbing Jun's torso with a screwdriver, which he spray painted to resemble an ice pick. And it's obvious that Junlin was already deceased when the stabbing began. There was no blood coming from his wounds, and when Magnotta moves the camera a little bit, you can see that Junlin's throat was slit. Over the next several minutes, you see Magnotta mutilate Junlin's body. That includes decapitation and dismemberment, followed by acts of necrophilia. Then removed chunks of flesh with a dull knife and a fork. He then had a puppy chew on the body. Then over the next day or so, he takes several trips to his building's trash room. He also comes and goes from the apartment, and for most of the security camera footage, he is wearing Junlin's t-shirt. And he sends 4 packages, each containing either a hand or a foot, to various locations in Canada, including an elementary school. On May 29th, after sitting there for 4 days, Junlin's torso was found in this suitcase. And not until July 1st was the head found in a park in Montreal. Magnotta fled the country within 2 days after murdering Junlin. First flew to Paris using a fake passport with the name Kirk Trammell. He was apprehended on June 4th, 2012 in Berlin by this epic line of military people in an internet cafe while he was looking up articles about himself. He tried to plead insanity, typical. That didn't work. He was found guilty on all charges, got 25 to life. And sorry guys and gals, but he is a taken man. Married a guy in prison who looks at a red flag and gives it a big ol' salute. And there's the sick today. That's not his husband, that's just another sick.
A man in Texas would use this photo essentially as if it were a hit list. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Retha Stratton. Viewer discretion is advised. By 1982, Retha was an 18-year-old high school graduate. She had recently graduated from Castleberry High School, which is in Fort Worth, Texas. This is her cheerleader squad that she had been a part of during her senior year at high school. One of these women is Susan Brown. On January 23rd, 1981, she took a phone call from a stranger who asked if her father was home. She said no, he's not, and that was the end of the call. Later that same night, Susan's back on another phone call with her sister when she hears the front door open and then close. When she walks towards the door, there is a man standing there. He was wearing a nylon stocking over his face and he had no shirt on. The man chased Susan throughout the house before eventually he caught her and then he sexually assaulted her. He then took off. Another woman pictured here is Lynn Vosberg. On November 11th, 1981, she got a phone call from a man asking if a person was there, but that person didn't even live there. She had then gone to bed, and then at some point she wakes up and there is a man kneeling next to her bed. A man wearing a nylon stocking over his face. Before she could do anything, he grabs her and he sexually assaults her as well. When he is done, he then just leaves the house. December 7th, 1981, another one of these women named Lisa Titchener. She was sleeping on this bed when she woke up to a man wearing a mask, running towards her, and then he jumped on top of her. He sexually assaulted her, all while her very ill mother was sitting in a chair in the other room. December 8th, 1981, another one of these women, Selena McDonald. She had taken a shower, and then when she got out of the shower and walked to her closet to open it, a man jumped out of it wearing a mask, and then yes, he sexually assaulted her too, and then left. This is a composite drawing based on the descriptions the women gave. He had one more victim left. January 21st, 1982, Retha Stratton, who had lived with a friend of hers, well, when her roommate got home that day, she noticed blood all over the floor. And when she got to Retha's bedroom, she found her dead on the floor. She was stabbed 38 times and the knife was still sticking in her chest. Witnesses saw a pickup truck near Retha's house, and a man by the name of Wesley Wayne Miller drove that same pickup truck. A girl he was dating at the time noticed he came home one day with blood all over his clothes, so he was brought in for questioning for the murder. At first he denied it, but eventually he confessed to it. His fingerprints even matched the scene, and he only got 25 years. In the evening hours of April 20th, 2006, a man would set out from his home with one goal: hurting a female. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Anna Svidersky. Viewer discretion is advised. Anna was born on April 26, 1988 in Russia. But when she was about 2 years old, the family would move to the States. Specifically, they would go to Vancouver, Washington. She went here to Fort Vancouver High School, where she was a senior who was set to graduate in June of 2006. She was excited for college. She had been working 2 or 3 jobs at a time. And at the time of this story, she was working at a McDonald's. And that is where she was on the evening of April 20th, 2006. Anna was sitting in a back corner table. She was either on her break or she was cleaning the table. That part's kind of unclear. But then, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this man enters the McDonald's. 28-year-old David Barton Sullivan. He was a level 2 sex offender. He had done time for attempted kidnapping. He spent about 3 months in a mental institution around those times where he was diagnosed as being a paranoid schizophrenic. According to witnesses, he just walks in on a beeline and goes straight to Anna and then takes out a knife and stabs her in the chest. And he did so at least 3 or 4 times. David did not know Anna. They had never met before. He would be arrested shortly after the stabbing, and when he was caught, he said that his intent that evening was to just hurt a female. Anna was still alive for a few moments after he fled the McDonald's, and she told her coworkers, "Tell my family I love them." And then she was pronounced dead at 9 p.m. This murder really just sort of rocked the community. It devastated everyone because Anna was just sort of this very normal teenager. You know, it didn't cause any problems. She had aspirations. She was looking forward to going to college. And then this random person does this random thing and just snuffs it all out. So he was charged with first-degree murder, but in June of 2007, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity. But he was put into a mental institution where I believe he is still there to this day, but I can't seem to confirm that. From what I can tell, he wasn't on proper medication or he wasn't taking it, but essentially he wasn't being looked after. And this is why mental health needs to be at the top of the list. Anna was memorialized on her MySpace page. Her story went worldwide. She got love from all corners of the globe. I'm gonna be sick. This is the case of Armin Meiwes, and it takes place in Germany. Oh dear God, viewer discretion is advised. Again, viewer discretion is advised. This one is sick. Meiwes was born on December 1st, 1961. He was born in West Germany. His father abandoned the family when he was 8 years old, and his mother was, I guess even though she was there, he felt she abandoned them too. He apparently really loved the story of Hansel and Gretel, and this inspired him to become a cannibal. After his mother died, he would spend a lot of time online on cannibal message boards. It got to a point where in March of 2001, he was looking for a volunteer that he could, eat. He used a website called the Cannibal Cafe. Cute. Well, he found a biter. Bernd Jürgen Brandes. Did I say that right? Sorry! They finally met on March 9th at Meiwes' home in a town called Wustfeld. Trigger warning, it's about to get gross. Really, really gross. And I'm being serious. Here we go. Brandes was a willing participant, and he agreed to have Meiwes sever off his manlyhood. He actually wanted it to be bitten off, but it didn't work. So Meiwes, oh God, he cooked it, and
Ramsey has his own way of doing things.
When you know, you know. The two of them began eating it together, but Brandes actually complained it wasn't cooked right. You two were made for each other, alright? Oh God. Meiwes couldn't finish it either, so he fed the rest to his dogs. Yeah, Ramsey Bolton, sounds right. Brandes was going in and out of consciousness in the bathtub, so Meiwes just finally stabbed him to death. Oh God, then he hung him up like a slaughtered animal. And he dismembered him and froze the parts, and he would eat him over the course of 10 months to a year. Meiwes put another ad out there in 2002. A college student saw the ad and reported him to the police, and he was arrested. The police found the uneaten body parts. He was initially convicted of manslaughter, but in 2005 he was retried and sentenced to life. Oh, okay, are we done? Oh God, oh. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Kim Wall. Kim was born on March 23rd, 1987 in Sweden. And by 2017, when this story takes place, she was a freelance journalist. In August of 2017, Kim was trying to score an interview with Danish inventor Peter Madsen. This fella right here. Well, he gave her a call back and said, "Hey, I would love to do an interview with you. Would you like to come aboard my submarine?" He had a midget submarine called the UC-3 Nautilus. And so the two of them arranged an interview on the submarine that would last roughly 2 hours. So, on August 10th, Kim boarded the submarine with Peter. But the submarine would never reappear. Well, with the exception of it was seen at 10:30 a.m. the next morning, but it was sinking, and it had sunk to the bottom of the ocean. Now, the night she boarded the submarine, after it didn't come back to dock, her boyfriend, Ole Stobbe, reported her missing. Now, after the submarine was reported missing, like I said, around 10:30 a.m., the submarine was spotted, but it was sinking. It was spotted by a boat who was helping conduct a search, and they found Peter Madsen basically swimming away from it. But Kim wasn't with him. When he got to shore, reporters were there, and they asked him, "Is everything okay?" He gave a thumbs up and said, "I'm just sad my submarine sank." Now, police obviously questioned him about where's Kim, and he said, "Oh yeah, I dropped her off at the tip of the island a while ago." But the police, they weren't buying it. And they actually arrested him and charged him with involuntary manslaughter for, quote, killing a woman in an unknown way in an unknown location. Well, the next day, Madsen went to court for all of this, and his story changed. He said Kim died in a freak accident on the submarine. He stated that a hatch had broken off and cracked her over the head. He got nervous and then gave her a burial at sea. They began searching the shallow ends of the sea where they were. And on August 21st, 2017, they discovered a torso. A woman's torso had washed up on shore. They tested the DNA and it confirmed to belong to Kim Wall. Her torso had 15 stab wounds, something typically a hatch falling on you doesn't do. She also had stabs around her lady parts. The next month, divers found her head. They found a bag with her clothes in it, and they found the knife. Then Madsen said, "Okay, yeah, her head got struck. I dismembered her to make it easier to bury her." Okay. Police searched his computer and found videos of women being strangled and tortured. In April of 2018, he was convicted of murder and got a life sentence. In 2020, he finally admitted to murdering her. He even tried to escape prison once. He didn't get far. Idiot. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Yingying Zhang. She was born on December 21st, 1990, in the city of Nanping in the Fujian province. In April of 2017, she would actually come to the United States, and this was to study agriculture and environmental sciences. And this would be at the University of Illinois at the Urbana-Champaign area. And Yingying was actually also happily engaged. But unfortunately, she's being talked about on my page, so she never got to marry him. June 9th, 2017. Yingying, who's pictured right there, she would be traveling by bus in Urbana, Illinois. This is because she had an appointment with an apartment complex to sign a new lease. She sent a text to the leasing agent at 1:39 p.m. that afternoon, stating she was going to be late. She told them that she would be there by approximately 2:10 that afternoon. When she got off that particular bus, she saw the other bus she was supposed to hop onto. She flagged it down, but the bus didn't stop. This is because it's against the busing company's policy to stop on the wrong side of the road so they don't encourage people to run into oncoming traffic. So she legged it to another bus stop and found herself on the corner of North Goodwin Avenue and West Clark Street, pictured right there. At exactly 2 p.m., the cameras picked up a black Saturn Astra drive past where she was standing. The car would then make a loop, and at 2:03, it was back at the bus stop. The video footage shows her talking to whoever's in the car, and then she gets in, and the car drives away. And Yingying would never be seen again. She never made it to her appointment. She never responded to any texts. She never answered her phone. By June 17th, she still isn't found, and her family arrives in the States. So investigators zeroed in on the Saturn Astra. They narrowed down the list to discover that there were 18 black Saturn Astras in the area. and this led them to creepy porn stash owner Brent Christensen. He owned a Saturn Astra, got a master's degree in physics, seemed like a totally normal, quiet dude. There is a fantastic JCS episode where you can watch his interrogation. I'd highly recommend it. I believe it's on Patreon. Investigators saw that in the image, one of the hubcaps was damaged, and when they inspected Brent's vehicle, it had the same damage. Brent claimed he had no idea what he was doing at that time. Eventually, he would suddenly remember picking up an Asian female that day. By the way, he was caught attending a memorial walk for Yingying. Police would question his girlfriend. She wore a wire, and he admitted to murdering Yingying. He said he held her against her will at his apartment, and it was sexually motivated. He bragged he was a serial killer. He got life in prison with no parole. He said he cut her head off, but she's never been found. Hola, verdadero criminers. I'm multilingual now. This is the case of Frank Lee Black Jr. Frank Black had been a school bus driver for a while, until he actually inherited the busing company that his father owned. So it was a company that contracted through numerous schools in the Sussex County, New Jersey area. His friend, Alan Mackerly... Oh, wait a minute. Hang on, Alan, hang on. Look, we're twins now! No? This is Alan Mackerly, a friend of Frank Black, who also operated a busing company in the same area. Now, in the mid-90s, Frank Black, his company would take over a busing contract that Mackerly had held for quite some time. And this would create a turf war, I guess. A school bus turf war. I swear to Christ, I don't get life. So, Frank Black's company will now take 150 students, and this would be from the Mine Hill School District in Morris County, New Jersey. In February of 1996, Frank Black flew to West Palm Beach, Florida, and this was for a business meeting he had arranged. But Frank Black would never return home. So it turns out that Lisa Costello, who was Alan Mackerly's girlfriend at the time, she was the woman who called Frank to set up this meeting down in Florida. So what the prosecution would later on say is that Lisa lured him there, and herself and Alan kidnapped Frank Black Jr. Then he was shot to death. Alan then wrapped him up in a bag and chucked him in the Atlantic Ocean. To this day, the body of Frank Black Jr. has never actually been found. However, a friend of Alan Mackerly's, whose name is Bill Anderson, he would go to police and tell them that Alan confessed to murdering Frank Black Jr. Anderson would then testify at the trial, said Frank Black was drugged and then kidnapped, taken to Mackerly's home there in West Palm Beach. He was then placed in a headlock and then was shot in the back of the head. Mackerly also confessed that his body, well, it wasn't sinking because of the decomposition, his body had kind of gassed up a little bit. So he then had to bring back the dead body to his house where he stabbed him several times and then put him back into the ocean. Well, in March of 1998, Alan Mackerly was found guilty. He was originally sentenced to death. He would go on to have 2 more trials, however, for this exact same case. And in 2003, he was finally reconvicted of the murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And Lisa Costello served 8.5 years for her role, including 20 months for obstructing justice. I said, "Good day, sir." This was 9-year-old Angie Housman, and she lived in St. Anne, Missouri. And on November 18th, 1993, after getting off of the school bus, which was literally just a few houses down from where she lived, Angie would disappear forever. She was reported missing right away, and an extensive search began. They would comb through the woods, through the neighborhoods. They searched by land and by air. They even had this composite sketch done of a man who was reportedly seen just a few days before Angie went missing. He was allegedly approaching children in the area. Another tip would come from one of Angie's teachers. And by the way, this is Angie's family at the time. Just a day before her disappearance, Angie reportedly told this teacher that I guess Angie had befriended some older gentleman, and she said he told her to call him uncle. But apparently that lead never came to anything helpful. The search would end 9 days after her disappearance. the 9-year-old girl would be found dead, tied to a tree. She was found by a hunter in the Bush Wildlife Conservation Area. And this is in a remote area kind of close to St. Louis. Authorities believe that she was actually alive when she was tied to the tree, and that she died from exposure. She actually had ice chips forming over her body because that's how cold it was. The autopsy would show that she was in fact sexually assaulted and likely kept alive for about a week. They were able to pull fingerprints off of duct tape from the crime scene, and he also left his DNA on her. However, the case would go cold, because back in 1983, they did not have the extensive testing with DNA they have now. 36 years later, they finally got a match with the DNA. It matched a creep by the name Earl Cox. This was him back in 1983. This is him now. He was in the Air Force in 1975. He was dishonorably discharged after he sexually assaulted 4 children in Germany. He was arrested for child abuse in 1992. He tried to entice a child over state lines in 2003. And he had 45,000 images of child pornography on his computer. He would confess to Angie's murder. His car just happened to break down where her bus let off, and that's when he saw her. If his car never broke down, she'd still be alive. He was sentenced to life with no parole. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Jessica Roach. Jessica was a 15-year-old girl living in Georgetown, Illinois with her family. On the afternoon of September 20th, 1993, Jessica got on her bike and went for a bike ride, something she did all the time. That afternoon, her sister got home after getting groceries and discovered that Jessica wasn't there. So she went out to the street and she was calling for her, but she got no response. Later, a bus driver named Daryl Morgan found her bike laying on its side. It was just right smack in the middle of the road. So the 15-year-old girl was reported missing that afternoon, and the search began immediately. Much like all of these types of cases I talk about, they search, they look through fields, they go by air, they go by lands, and nothing came up. And much like most of these cases I cover as well, she just poofed into thin air. But we all know that's not what actually happens. 6 weeks later, on November 8th, 1993, the decomposed body of Jessica Roach would be discovered. She was actually found in Vermilion County, which is in Indiana. The autopsy would show that her jaw was broken, indicating that she had been punched several times in the face. Ooh. Yuck. This guy is named Larry Hall. In October 22nd of 1994, 2 girls would report a story that they were being stalked by Larry Hall in Georgetown, Illinois. He was pestering them, asking them random questions, but then eventually he drove away. The girls, of course, were very concerned and nervous about this, so they went home and they called the authorities. And they also had the forethought to jot down his license plate number, and good thing they did. Police realized that back in May of 1994, this same man was stalking 2 other girls in Georgetown, Illinois. Those 2 girls managed to escape him because they were both on bikes and they rode away to an area where he couldn't follow in a van. Now, he lived at the time in Indiana where Jessica's body was found. But there was very little physical evidence connecting Larry to her death, because there was no evidence at all. It had basically been destroyed. So, through circumstantial evidence, he was arrested for the murder of Jessica Roach. And then in 1995, he was tried and he was convicted of her murder. But then an appellate court overturned his conviction, and then he went through another trial. And that was just a year later. The new trial was in 1997, and he was once again convicted for the murder of Jessica Roach. The appellate court did not overturn that conviction, and he's now currently serving a life sentence. He is also a suspected serial killer. Perhaps later I'll cover more. You're a creep. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case known as the eyeball killer. Viewer discretion is advised. Graphic content ahead. This fella behind me is Charles Frederick Albright. He was born on August 10th, 1933. I think back when they only used horses for transportation, right? He was born in Amarillo, Texas. Yeehaw. He was basically in an orphanage from birth. And he was eventually adopted, and, you know, he had very strict adoptive parents, as most of these folks tend to have. By his teenage years, he would buy guns and murder animals with them. Oh, and his mom would help stuff the animals because he wanted to be a taxidermist. Oh, okay, cool. So she was cool with it. Okay, great. By age 13, he was a good old-fashioned thief. He graduated from high school a few years early at the age of 15, so he was actually very advanced, educationally speaking. He was really interested in medical stuff. Possibly even wanted to go to medical school. But he was arrested at age 16 for stealing money, and he was put in jail. What? No, shocker. There's a precursor to all of these horrible crimes? Oh my god. In 1981, he was visiting some friends, and he would molest their 14-year-old daughter. He pled guilty to this and was put on probation. Okay, that's a big swing and a miss for the justice system. By 1984, he wanted to be a scout leader for the Boy Scouts. Thankfully, he was rejected. December 13th, 1990. 33-year-old prostitute Mary Lou Pratt. She was found dead wearing only a t-shirt and bra. She was shot in the back of the head and was beaten. Her eyes, both of them, were surgically removed by someone who knew what they were doing. February 10th, 1991. Susan Beth Peterson, a 27-year-old prostitute. She was found dead outside of the Dallas, Texas city limits, nude, shot 3 times, and both of her eyes were removed. March 10th, 1991. Shirley Williams, you guessed it, a prostitute, was found dead, propped up on a curb. She was beaten, shot in the face, and her eyeballs were both removed. Now, this is all happening in the Oak Cliff district of Dallas. On March 23rd, 1991, Albright was arrested for these murders. His hair matched the hair left on Shirley Williams' body. In December of 1991, he was found guilty of murdering Shirley Williams. He was not convicted of the other 2. He would die in prison. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Kaylee Sawyer. Kaylee was born on March 2nd, 1993 in Bend, Oregon. By 2016, she was attending Central Oregon Community College, and she lived very close to the campus in an apartment building, and she shared the apartment with her boyfriend, Cameron Reimhofer. On July 23, 2016, Kaylee was out having a good time with her friends at a bachelorette party. About midnight, she called Cameron, her boyfriend, to pick her up, which he did. Somewhere along the way, they got into an argument, to a point when they got to the apartment complex, she said, I'm gonna stay in the car to blow off some steam, so he went back to the apartment. After about 10 or 15 minutes, he noticed Kaylee didn't come back up yet, so he went back out to the car, and she was gone. He did manage to speak to her through a phone conversation and text, but she was like, no, I'm not coming home right now. And Kaylee would never come home again. She was expected at work at a dental office she worked at the next morning, and she didn't show up, so Cameron reported her missing to the police. On July 25th, a Bend police officer by the name of Isabel Ponce Lara, that her husband Edwin killed Kaylee. Edwin Lara was a security officer on the campus of Central Oregon Community College. Edwin would tell his wife that he accidentally struck Kaylee with his vehicle, panicked, and then dumped her body. He told his wife that Kaylee's belongings, pictured here, were in the shed in the back, and then he took a 9mm handgun and took off. Edwin would then take his vehicle, drive to his parents, and then take their car. The trunk of his vehicle, police would later find, had a lot of dried blood, and there was hair stuck on the rear bumper. He then drove to Salem, where he would kidnap a woman named Andrea Mays. This is the only picture of him I'm going to show, by the way. She was stopped for a moment uploading a photo to Facebook when he carjacked her. He forced her to drive to California, and there is footage of them checking into a hotel. When the car they were in broke down, they happened to see a man by the name of Jack Levy by his car. Edwin shot him in the gut, he survived, and stole his car and still kidnapped Andrea. He would then later steal another car with a family in it, in which he kidnapped the woman in the car plus the 2 kids. He told a story about how he murdered Kaylee Sawyer. told them he had an urge to kill. He kidnapped Kaylee, put her in the back of this vehicle where she couldn't escape. He sexually assaulted her, and then he bashed her skull in with a rock, and he kept the rock. Her body would be found a few days later. This is footage from his Facebook Live he did right before he got arrested. This is the kidnapped woman, Andrea. Cops were chasing him. He would eventually surrender. You can hear his 911 call on YouTube. He was sentenced to life in prison. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case known as the Old Country Buffet murder. This particular Old Country Buffet is located in Dartmouth, Massachusetts. On a July morning of 2006, 39-year-old Valerie Oransky was getting the Old Country Buffet opened. She was the general manager of that particular establishment at the time. She was in the restaurant with 28-year-old Ryan T. Jones. He had been a dishwasher there for a couple of years. Now, reportedly, he had issues with Valerie that they kind of went back and forth and argued a lot. And Ryan allegedly had a history of mental health issues since before he was a teenager. Well, on that July morning, he would lure Valerie to the women's room, gave her some fake story to get her in there, and he had already pre-hid a pipe in the bathroom. When Valerie entered the bathroom, he began to bludgeon her with the pipe. When she had finally collapsed to the ground, he then took out a knife and stabbed her multiple times until she died. Ryan then proceeded to stab himself a couple of times, and then the police were called. The story he gave was that an assailant came in, killed Valerie, attacked him, and then fled. He said the assailant was wearing a mask, so he never saw their face. So the police began searching the area with, dogs, helicopters. They searched everywhere. They couldn't find this assailant. And then they began questioning people in the shopping center, people who had, known Valerie, who had known Ryan. Police quickly began to learn that Ryan probably wasn't telling the truth. Police would discover the knife and they would find out that it had his fingerprints on it. They conducted a search of his home, and I guess from that they discovered that he definitely had some animosity towards Valerie. So he was very quickly arrested and charged with her murder. He, of course, because most of these people do, tried to plead insanity, but that wouldn't work considering that they had evidence of premeditation, especially the fact that Ryan hid a pipe in the bathroom, preparing for this, and then he deliberately lured Valerie into the bathroom. That's premeditation, that's not insanity. And the jury wouldn't buy it either. Ryan Jones was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He briefly tried to make an attempt at the Massachusetts Supreme Court to overturn the conviction, but it didn't work. Sorry, bud. He will be serving the rest of his life in prison, all because he didn't like a coworker. Worth it, bud? Jesus. This is the case of 12-year-old Danny Meyer from New York. This story takes us to a little small town in New York called Maybrook. It's about an hour north of New York City. And in June of 1996, 12-year-old Danny Meyer was on his way to a Little League game. But Danny would never get to the game. By 1 p.m. that afternoon, his mother was panicking, called the police, and reported her son missing. Danny would take a shortcut through the woods from his home to the Little League field. And it's somewhere in here where tragedy would strike. A few hours after he was reported missing, 2 young children were walking through this same path in the woods. And unfortunately, they would stumble across the body of Danny Meyer. He was face down in the dirt. They were able to find his body because they saw his baseball cap about 100 feet away, and they kind of just went towards that direction, and that's where he was. Danny had been stabbed multiple times. Police would obviously investigate, but they came up with no leads. No witnesses to the crime. They virtually had nothing. It wouldn't be until just a couple of days later when there was a huge break. 2 journalists who were writing a story about the murder, they wanted to walk the same path Danny did. And in nearly the exact area where his body was found, they just so happened to stumble across a man who was hanging from a tree. He had a red bicycle at his tippy toes. He was moaning, he was in pain. The journalist just rushed over, pulled out a knife they had, a pocket knife, and they cut him down. It was a 19-year-old man named Juan Miguel Panado. He claimed that an assailant sexually assaulted him and then strung him up in a tree. He spoke in very broken English, and he had to use hand gestures to communicate. But there was something suspicious about him. So when police got there, they would begin questioning him. And through this questioning, they would discover that he was the actual person that killed Danny Meyer. And the police were eventually able to confirm this with DNA evidence. He would then be convicted of the murder of Danny. There was no real motive. It was just random. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, which he was just recently denied parole. The town has built a playground in Danny's memory. Rest in peace, Danny. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Jessica Heeringa. Jessica was born on July 16, 1987, and she lived in Norton Shores, Michigan. At the time, she was dating a man named Dakota, and the two of them, they had a son together. His name is Devlin, and at the time of the story, he was 3 years old. Jessica was described as a loving, wonderful mother who wanted all the best things for her son. She was working at an Exxon gas station where she typically would work the late shift. She had regular customers every single night that knew her and, quite frankly, just loved her and her character and who she was. On the late evening of April 26, 2013, Jessica was finishing her shift at the Exxon station. The store would close at 11:30 p.m. Her last recorded transaction was at 10:55 p.m. and a customer had just purchased a lighter and then left. One of her regular customers named Craig Harpster went to the gas station at 11:07 p.m. when the store was still supposed to be open. He had gone there like he had done many times to purchase gas, which he usually paid with cash. When he walked in, he didn't see Jessica anywhere. He called out for her, he checked the walk-in freezer, but she was nowhere. But he did notice her purse and belongings were all still there, so he actually called 911. And keep in mind, it's only been a 12-minute window between her last transaction and when this 911 call was made. And unfortunately, this gas station did not have any cameras. The police got there, and then soon enough, one of the store managers got there. Now, the store manager told a story that her and her husband were riding their motorcycles past the gas station around 11 o'clock when they happened to see a man with a silver minivan behind the store closing the doors. They noticed he opened the doors again and then closed them again, and they got a pretty decent look at his face. Oh, God, I'll never get used to these. This was the composite drawing of the man they saw. This is the man that is suspected to have possibly taken Jessica, because she was gone. They did find traces of Jessica's blood underneath where the van was last seen. Police were able to rule out her boyfriend Dakota. They also ruled out some customers who had been kind of infatuated with her, and the case went cold for years. She just poofed into thin air and was never seen again. Now, in June of 2014, a woman named Rebekah Blech was shot and killed, and her case would go unsolved for a couple of years. That is until April of 2016, when a man named Jeffrey Willis kidnapped a 16-year-old girl in his silver minivan, pointed a gun at her, but she managed to just jump out of the car. And using CCTV footage, such as these last two photos, they were able to find out the van belonged to Jeffrey Willis. It had shell casings that matched the ammunition that killed Rebekah Blech. At his home on his computer, they found indisputable evidence that he kidnapped and murdered Jessica Heeringa, and it was sexually motivated. He received multiple life sentences. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of 18-year-old Generro Sanchez. Viewer discretion is advised. Generro was a freshman at East Central University near Ashland, Oklahoma. He was described as having a huge personality and everyone just loved him. He was studying civil engineering. His family said he loved video games, he loved reading. Now, also at East Central University with him, was another freshman, Jared Murray. Now, the two did live in the same dorm, but they were not friends and they were not acquaintances. Now, on December 5th, 2012, in just kind of like a chance meeting, Jared would ask Generro if he could drive him to a local Walmart and he would give him $20 for it. Generro agreed to do it because he was a good person who wanted to help others, you see. There were some people who wondered why Generro would even give Jared a ride to begin with, simply because earlier that year, Jared had gotten into a big old fight with another student on campus. Police were called and Generro was there. He witnessed the fight. So he already saw this kind of like aggressiveness out of this man, even though he didn't really know him. Later on, Generro's mom would say, when Jared asked for a ride, my son was just extending an olive branch. Bygones are going to be bygones, and we're going to start fresh. Sadly, this forgiving and charitable side of Generro would unfortunately lead to his demise. When they arrived at the Walmart and parked, Jared would pull out a .40 caliber Springfield handgun that he stole. He pointed the gun at Generro and then asked him to drive north of Asher. Now, Generro was freaking out, and this is according to Jared. So what he did was he took out the magazine and he actually gave it to Generro. And this was to ease his mind, even though in his pocket he had another clip. When they got to Substation Road, Jared loaded the gun again. He then fired 2 shots at Generro. One of them somehow missed, but the other bullet struck him in the head. The vehicle, because it was still moving, began to drift, and then it just crashed into a tree, and then into a ditch. Jared then pulled Generro out of the vehicle, dumped him on the ground, where he noticed he was actually still alive. He then fired another shot point blank into the middle of his head, which then this killed Generro. He covered his body with dirt, leaves, and a single stick. Jared would be caught and arrested shortly afterwards. Why did he do it? In his haunting confession here, he did it simply because he just wanted to know what it felt like. That's it. He is genuinely insane, and he was found not guilty by reason of insanity, and he is still committed to this day, but can be released when he's cured. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Mark Xander. Mark was born on May 20th, 1955 in Washington, D.C., and at the time of the story, he was living in Stevensville, Maryland with his wife. And unfortunately, he lived on the same street as a former Baltimore Police Department officer, and his name is Charles Edward Pete Richter. I don't know why Pete, but that's part of his name. Now, these two lived on the same street for about 14 years. By the way, this is Mark Xander's wife. I presume this is their house, but I can't find an actual picture that's for sure their house. These neighbors would constantly argue. They would fight over like little noise issues. You know, really, it was just 2 dudes having a pissing contest. Now, apparently, the biggest cause of concern for Charles Richter was Mark Xander's Rottweiler. And ultimately, it was the dog that led Charles Richter to do what he did. Mark Xander was on his lawn on April 3rd, 2011. And he was just using some hedge clippers and doing some yard work when former police officer, again, Charles Richter, walked over onto his neighbor's lawn holding a 2-shot 22 caliber Derringer, and he just shot Mark Xander fatally. He killed him. Charles would then call 911 and turn himself in immediately. He claimed it was self-defense because why not? Police arrived and Mark was dead on the lawn, and he still had the hedge clippers in his hands. And his faithful, beloved Rottweiler was sitting next to his body. The dog was fine, by the way. The theory goes is that the Rottweiler crossed over onto Charles's lawn, and apparently that was enough to set Charles off. Apparently, Charles grabbed the Rottweiler by its collar and was threatening to call animal control, and then he claimed that that is when Mark Xander went on the attack. Except Mark's wife said, nope, that didn't happen. Actually, he was afraid of Charles because Charles had many guns. The neighbors in the neighborhood said, yeah, Charles is a menace. He's constantly picking fights with people. And he always filed noise complaints against everyone. He's even sued most people on the block. Unsuccessfully, by the way. In 2012, he was found guilty of second-degree murder. He got 20 years for that. He also got 5 years for using a firearm. Oh, other facts? They also found child pornography on his computer. He got more time for that. I just don't know how much time. God, I love when justice is served. Oh my god. This is the case of Kellyanne Bates. Viewer discretion is definitely advised. Kellyanne Bates was born on May 18th, 1978 in Manchester, England. We'll get back to her in a minute. This poor man's Elton John is James Patterson Smith, born in 1947, also in Manchester, England. In the 70s and 80s, he went through several wives/girlfriends. All of them ended because he was extremely physically abusive. He was even punching one of his girlfriends who was pregnant in the stomach. Now, all of these wives and girlfriends did manage to eventually leave him or escape from him. However, for some reason, he was never arrested for any of this abuse, and I don't know why. He even tried to drown 2 previous women in the sink. Again, why was he never arrested? In 1993, he began the grooming process of 14-year-old Kelly Ann Bates. One of his previous girlfriends was 15 years old, so this was not unusual for him. They met each other through a mutual friend because Kelly babysat for that friend. About 2 years later, when she was 16 years old, she would kind of surprise her family by saying, "I'm moving in with James Patterson Smith." She lied to her parents and said he was like in his mid-30s, but he was actually pushing 50. Her mother always felt that James Smith was off, and she started to notice her daughter with bruises. So she urged her to leave James Smith, but she wouldn't do it. By the end of 1995, Kelly left her part-time job kind of unexpectedly, and by 1996, she almost never left the house. Her parents knew something was wrong. Kelly's brother went to their home so he could see her, but James said, "No, she's not here. She doesn't want to see you." And on April 16th, 1996, James would call the police to say he accidentally killed his girlfriend, Kelly Bates, who was 17, saying she inhaled water accidentally when they were fighting while she was in the bathtub. That's interesting. Here's what her autopsy said. Trigger warning, viewer discretion advised again. Scalding to her buttocks and leg. Burns on her thigh from an iron. A fractured arm. Multiple stab wounds by forks, knives, and scissors. Stab wounds inside of her mouth. Both her hands were crushed. Mutilation to her ears, nose, mouth, and genitalia. Wounds caused by pruning shears. Both of her eyes were gouged out. They said likely for 3 weeks before her death. She was partially scalped. That don't happen in a bathtub. Her cause of death was drowning. He was arrested and received a life sentence. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Lena Svensson and Mohammad Ammouri. Viewer discretion is advised. I do also apologize in advance. I am looking up how to pronounce a lot of the names in this story, but sometimes it's still not perfect. On a quiet morning on October 19th, 2004, in the town of Linköping in Sweden, 2 people would be brutally and senselessly murdered. 8-year-old Mohammad, who was just walking down that road, was just stabbed to death. And then, with only the assumption that she might have seen this act happen, Lena, who had no relation to Mohammad at all, was also stabbed to death on that same exact road. That would be where these 2 arrows are pointing. I'm not sure if you can see that one or not. The person who murdered them fled. Police would recover the actual murder weapon because the killer dropped it. The killer also left behind a bloody wool cap. They also would find DNA that would eventually not be linked to either one of the victims, so it was the killer's DNA. There were witnesses, sort of. Witnesses who only saw a person running away from an area, which they would later find out would be an area where there were 2 dead bodies, so they didn't see the actual attack happen. The only description they gave was it was a young man with blonde hair. But even with the technology we had in 2004, which technically wasn't all that long ago, they still found no matches to the DNA. They had no suspects. The motive? No idea. 2 random people who were randomly stabbed. A young boy and an older woman who had no relation to each other. What do you make of that? Police would receive thousands upon thousands of tips, but none of them ever panned out to anything even remotely close to a solution to this. This case file grew to become Sweden's 2nd largest murder investigation of all time, and it was second to the 1986 murder of their prime minister. But in 2019, they were finally able to crack the case, thanks to the DNA ancestry tests that have now become very popular and extremely helpful. They specifically found a match from a genealogy website, people use to find long-lost relatives. The DNA matched a 37-year-old recluse named Daniel Nyqvist. A man who basically lived very modestly and very quietly, basically like a hermit. He spent most of his time on his computer. His friends would reveal that after high school, he became a different person. A scarier person. In fact, one of his friends even called the tip line way back then, but it got lost in all of the tips that were sent in. Daniel Nivquist would have been about 21 when the attack happened. He was arrested and charged with murder, and he would confess. Why did he do it? He said the voices in his head. He's in psychiatric care indefinitely. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of 31-year-old Cedar Falls, Iowa resident Curtis Ross. Curtis loved to hunt. Not my personal cup of tea, but hey, you do you. On November 24th, 2017, yes, right around Thanksgiving, Curtis was out hunting, and he was doing so in an area called Appanoose County, and this is a hunting ground that he referred to as Narnia. Unfortunately for Curtis and his family, this would be the last time anyone would ever see him alive. On that unfortunate November 24th day, a sheriff's deputy would find the naked body of an unknown male floating in a nearby creek. And this was near Rathburn Lake. It would soon be identified as the body of 31-year-old Curtis Ross. He had been shot 10 times, and the coroner would determine he was also stabbed 26 times. His neck, his abdomen, and his legs were all gashed open. It was an absolutely horrific death. But who would do this to Curtis? Who would do something so monstrous to this man? He didn't have any enemies. He was well loved by his friends and family. Police had a hard time really kind of connecting this to anyone in his life. While searching through the hunting grounds, they did find a box of ammunition that matched the ammunition that killed Curtis. There was a palm print on that box of ammunition. The district attorney's office was able to correlate to another story where the ex-girlfriend of a man named Ethan Davis, where he entered the ex-girlfriend's home and took the child the two of them had. He brought the child to his parents' house and left him there, and then he laid low for 30 hours. Well, authorities would determine that the palm print left on the ammunition box there in the hunting grounds, it matched Ethan Davis. So they got a warrant to search the family farm near Promise City where his parents lived. They found his vehicle, which was hidden, body armor, a backpack with ammunition in it. They also found an AR-15, which is the exact weapon that killed Curtis Ross. Ethan Davis's fingerprints were found on that weapon, just so they could match it to him, and it had DNA from Curtis Ross on the scope of the weapon. Authorities determined that Ethan Davis perched up on a hilltop. He randomly found Curtis Ross in his scopes and fired upon him. And then he approached him and stabbed him repeatedly. What was the motive? Well, actually the state didn't come up with one. They presented no motive at the trial. Ethan Davis's rifle undoubtedly killed Curtis, and that was enough to convict him. And he got life in prison without parole. Womp womp. On Halloween night 1973, a 9-year-old girl from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin would go missing. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Lisa Ann French. Viewer discretion is advised. Lisa was born on June 2nd, 1964 in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. By age 9, she was a member of the Girl Scouts. On that 1973 Halloween night, Lisa left her house around 5:45 p.m. Her costume that night was that of a hobo. She was wearing a black felt hat, a green parka, and blue masking tape on her jeans. They also put some makeup on her cheeks to look like freckles. Lisa was supposed to go trick-or-treating that night with her friend Ann, but Ann had gotten in trouble, so she was grounded and was not allowed to go out that night. So Lisa French went trick-or-treating by herself. Somewheres in the 6 o'clock hour that night, she got to the house of one of her neighbors, Gerald Turner Jr. And after that, she was never seen again. Lisa's parents had given her a 7 o'clock curfew, but she never got home. By 10 o'clock that evening, they organized a neighborhood search for the little girl. They did not find her anywhere in the neighborhood. The following 4 days, everyone searched for her. 5,000 volunteers, They had auxiliary police officers, the U.S. National Guard, and the Girl Scouts all actively searched for her. But on November 3rd, 1973, a farmer in Taycheedah, Wisconsin, he found 2 brown plastic bags behind a barbed wire fence. One of the bags had a costume in it, the costume of a hobo. The other bag contained the body of 9-year-old Lisa Ann French. Because Lisa was seen at Gerald Turner's house, he became a suspect very early on. Finally, 9 months later, he would actually confess. He said that night that Lisa knocked on his door, said trick or treat, and he began talking to her about candy, and he managed to lure her inside of his home. And then he managed to lure her to his bedroom, where he violently sexually assaulted her and allegedly strangled her. He said during the sexual assault she appeared to go unconscious, and she was no longer breathing. The coroner would later rule that she likely died of circulatory shock due to the sexual assault. His girlfriend and their child came home around 7 p.m., so he quickly had to hide Lisa's body in the bathroom. When his girlfriend left a little bit later on, that is when he disposed of her body on the farm. In February 1975, he was convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 38 years, where he's been paroled a couple of times, but he is currently back in prison. A girl would be murdered on Halloween night simply because her killer was bored. Hello, true crimerers. It's time for another deadly Halloween. Viewer discretion is advised. This was 17-year-old Maria Ciallella from Brick Township, New Jersey. At around 6:30 p.m. on Halloween night, 1981, Maria was leaving her house. She was going to be attending a Halloween party. She asked her parents for a little bit of money. Her father, on the way out, said, "Please get home early tonight." She agreed, but that would be the last time her parents ever spoke to Maria. At approximately 12:20 a.m., she would be spotted by a police officer walking down Route 88 on her way home. He was on his way responding to a call, but on his way back about 10 minutes later, he was going to stop to give her a ride, but she was gone. And Maria, she never got home. By the following morning, the parents called police and reported her missing. Her parents knew she wasn't a runaway. They knew something had to have happened to her, and they would continue looking for her for 2 years. On August 28, 1982, the body of a young girl would be found behind a Burger King in Ocean Township, New Jersey. It was the body of Anna Olisowicz. A woman by the name of Teresa Smith would go to police to say that her ex, Richard Biegenwald, he was the one to have killed Anna. Why? He just wanted to do it. Richard was known as a thrill killer. He would pick up random people, he didn't know them, and he killed them because he just wanted to know what it felt like. In 1957, Richard was actually convicted of burglary and murder, but he was paroled after just 17 years because he had good behavior. So, police were able to get a warrant, and this was to search the home and property of Richard's mother in Staten Island. They would find 2 bodies. One of those bodies was Maria Ciallella. Her autopsy would show that she was killed by 2 bullets to the head, and then she was dissected into 3 separate pieces, put into garbage bags, and then buried in the yard. They never found her clothing. It's possible Richard kept them as a trophy. The other body belonged to another 17-year-old girl who was also Richard's thrill kill. Her name was Deborah Osborne. Ugh, you look like a poor man's John Goodman. The murder he committed in 1957 was a man by the name of Stephen Sladowski. And then in the 80s, he killed Maria Ciallella, Deborah Osborne, Anna Olisowicz, and a drug dealer named William Ward. He did have a partner, a man by the name of Darren Fitzgerald. On January 22nd, 1983, they were both arrested. Richard was convicted and sentenced to death, but then that was commuted to life in prison. He died in 2008.